Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim. This video record is the lecture of skeletal muscle tissue. When you run, your heart is beating rapidly and your breathing is rapid and deep. You do not eat while you are running. Therefore, blood is shunted away from the digestive organ and a greater volume of blood is delivered to skeletal muscles to maximize the oxygen supply to the muscle. These actions are accompanied by muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is the most abundant tissue of the body and one of the most adaptable tissue. Movement of the limb, the heart, and other parts of the body are made possibly by muscle cell. Bone cannot move itself. It is muscle which makes bone move. Muscle cells function like a tiny motor, motor. Muscle cells use energy extracted from nutrient molecules such as glucose in the same way as motors use energy provided by electric current. The nervous system also regulates and communicates with muscle tissue so that smooth, coordinated movement can be generated. Muscle tissue has functional properties that are very unique to muscle tissue compared to other tissues. One property is contractibility. Contractibility is the ability of a muscle to shorten and become thicker. When muscle contracts, it causes movement of the structure to which it is attached. As you see this figure, this person flexing the forearm, then bicep brachii attached to humerus makes ulnar bone move toward humerus. For this movement, a specific type of microfilament, which is called myofilament, are responsible for shortening the muscle cell. Microfilament, do you remember? There are three kinds of cytoskeleton. One is microtubule, intermediate filament, and microfilament. This microfilament, specific type of microfilament in the muscle cell is called myofilament. Two kinds of myofilament, such as actin protein and myosin protein, are major players to generate contractile force in muscle cells. So these two kinds of myofilament are responsible for shortening the muscle cell. Another property of muscle tissue is excitability. Excitability means this is the way how nervous system communicate to muscle tissue. Muscle respond to stimuli. Normally, skeletal muscle contract as a result of stimulation by nerve signal or nerve impulse or action potential. This is electrical impulse generated in nervous system. Nerve signals are transmitted through membrane of muscle cell. These trigger rapid and large-scale movement. Somebody knock the door, and then you hear that nerve signal allow you to stand up and walk toward the door. So nerve signal transmit through muscle cell membrane, then this nerve impulse trigger large-scale movement. Smooth and cardiac muscles can contract without nerve stimuli. Smooth and cardiac muscles have autorhythmic movement. So these two kinds of muscles do not necessarily require nerve impulse. Nevertheless, if they receive nerve signal, then they respond stimulation by nerve and hormone, so they also coordinate the movement with nervous system together. But skeletal muscle tissue necessarily require nerve signal. We call that excitability. Another property of muscle tissue is extensibility. Extensibility means muscle can be stretched beyond its normal resting length. So contraction of one skeletal muscle will stretch an opposing muscle. For example, bicep brachii contract, then tricep brachii extend, and vice versa. Extensibility is not limited to counterpart muscle. In case of smooth muscle, the muscular wall of digestive organ are stretched by the food. So you can eat as much as, then still the wall of stomach can manage large volume of food because smooth muscle has property of extensibility. Also, urine makes the muscular wall of urinary bladder extended. Approximately 2/3 of bladder is filled with urine. People have a feeling to urinate. But sometimes it's not proper situation in which you can go to the restroom freely. Then you need to bear with that, and then the wall of a bladder continue to hold and extend more urine until you can urinate. Therefore, muscle tissue has property of extensibility. Elasticity means once muscle has been stretched, muscle tissue recoil to its original resting length. We call this elasticity. It's like a rubber band. You pull away rubber band to both ends and it stretched. Now, when you release, let it go, and then rubber band goes back its original state. We call this elasticity. Once muscle has been stretched, muscle tissue can go back to its original resting length. We call this elasticity. So based on these properties, we can figure out the function of muscle tissue. What are the functions of muscle tissue? First, definitely produce body movement. Contraction of skeletal muscles is responsible for the overall movement of the body, such as walking, running, singing, even you are listening, writing something on the paper. All this kind of movement can be generated by muscle tissue. A skeletal muscle attaches to the bone by way of a connective tissue and moves the body by moving the bone. I mentioned that the bone cannot move itself. Bone facilitates movement. It is muscle which makes the bone move. Movement produced by skeletal muscle include communication. What kind of communication? All aspects of communication, such as speaking, writing, typing, gesturing, and even facial expression can be made by muscle tissue so that we can read the other person's mind by way of recognizing the movement of a skeletal muscle. What about the smooth muscle? What kind of movement can be produced by smooth muscle? Food can be moved in the digestive tract by the movement of a muscle placed in the wall of a hollow organ. So these kinds of hollow organ, here's a wall. This wall is composed of smooth muscle tissue. And smooth muscle tissue has movement so that bolus, like food, can move forward. So bolus or food can be moved in the digestive tract by the movement of a muscle placed in the wall of hollow organs. Therefore, contraction of smooth muscle behind the bolus forces it move forward. Waves of muscle contraction move bolus toward the stomach next to intestine. What about the movement of a cardiac muscle? heart is beating. The contraction of a cardiac muscle causes the heart to beat. This propels blood to all parts of the body. Second function of a muscle tissue is opening and closing body passageway. The contraction of a smooth muscle within the walls of internal organs and the blood vessels cause constriction of those structures. You can see here constriction. In constriction, so between organ, between esophagus and stomach, between stomach and small intestine, there is a passageway. We call this sphincter. This sphincter muscle at the border of organ in gastrointestinal tract, GI tract, digestive tract, then once bolus enters stomach, this sphincter closes so that it prevents bolus flow backward. As people get old, this sphincter muscle become loose. Therefore, the bolus in stomach flow backward to esophagus. The bolus inside the stomach is high acidic. Inner wall of esophagus have no way to manage it, such a strong acidic stuff. Therefore, people feel pain. We call that heartburn. This constriction can help and mix food and water in the digestive tract. And also, this constriction propels secretion from organs and regulate the blood flow through blood vessels, especially by the valve of the venous vessel in leg. In other words, in the leg, because of gravity, blood easily flow down. The blood running in the veins need to flow up into heart. So the blood need to flow against gravity. If this person does not have a good elasticity of a muscle, then this blood is gonna flow back. At the time, in the blood vessel, there's a valve. This valve closes. Then this valve prevents the blood flow downward. This valve is made up of muscle tissue. Therefore, constriction can regulate blood flow through blood vessel, especially by the valve of the venous vessel in leg. Another function of muscle tissue is maintenance posture and stabilize joint. So skeletal muscles constantly maintain tone, which keep us sitting or standing postures. So if we look at this figure, the left posture is not good posture. The third one is also poor posture. But the second one, you just make your vertebrae upright. Therefore, this is a balanced upright posture. And your spine, your vertebrae cannot organize in this way. Actually, muscle hold, anchor each vertebrae in right position so that this person can maintain good posture. When you're sitting in front of a computer now, also your muscle hold your bone so that the muscle try to maintain posture for a long time. The constant low-level contraction of muscles strengthen many joints. So joint between two bones, when two bones meet around the joint, the muscles hold the bones. Therefore, this low-level contraction of a muscle stabilizes many joints. Another function of a muscle tissue is the production of a body heat. When skeletal muscles contract, heat is generated as a byproduct. This released heat is critical to maintain body temperature. So when you engage in exercise, then heat can be generated at the time you are sweating, to cool down the body. What about in cold weather? What does muscle tissue do to maintain body temperature constantly? The wall of a blood vessel is made up of muscle tissue. This blood vessel constrict or narrow to reduce blood flow, we called vasoconstriction. The constriction of the smooth muscle in blood vessel is called vasoconstriction. This vasoconstriction decreases blood flow to the skin and helps to minimize heat loss from warm blood, therefore preserve a normal internal temperature. Also, pulling water from the blood and store water in the bladder. That's the reason why you want to urinate more often in cold environment. There are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, smooth muscle. You already studied this in the lab. And when you classify 3 types of muscle tissue, you need to think about 2 criteria. One is striation. You need to look at whether this muscle tissue has striation or not. Second criteria is the mode of contraction. Does this muscle tissue move voluntarily or involuntarily? These 2 criteria clearly categorize 3 types of muscle tissue. So this is skeletal muscle tissue. You can see clear striation. Cardiac muscle tissue, you also see striation. Less than skeletal muscle, but still striation is present. In smooth muscle tissue, you cannot see striation, no striation. What is the mode of movement? Skeletal muscle tissue voluntarily move. It's up to you. The movement of skeletal muscle tissue depends on your free will. Cardiac and smooth muscle tissue, they commit involuntary movement. So they always move regardless of your control. Let's look at smooth muscle tissue first. Smooth muscle tissue can be found in the wall of a hollow internal organ, except heart. Heart is also one of internal organ, but the wall of heart is not made up of smooth muscle tissue. It is made up of cardiac muscle tissue. Except the heart, the rest hollow internal organ, their wall is composed of smooth muscle tissue. Also, interior of the eye, the muscle of iris also is made up of smooth muscle tissue. Also, the wall of blood vessel also composed of smooth muscle tissue. No striation. Cells are elongated, tapered. Tapered means the edge become narrower. Also engage in movement involuntarily. Smooth muscle perform a variety of functions, including mixing food in the stomach and intestine, or dilating and constricting the pupil of eyes, and regulating the flow of blood through blood vessel. Therefore, it is called a visceral muscle because it consists of the wall of a visceral organ. Smooth muscles are innervated by the involuntary division of the nervous system. When a person loses consciousness due to accident, the doctor checks the pulse as a signal from the heart. Sometimes the heart beating stops very brief moment. Then the doctor opens the patient's eyes and sheds light on the pupil. The pupil of eye responds to the light stimuli. This indicates the patient have a high chance to survive. How does the pupil respond to the light stimuli? There are 2 layers of smooth muscles surrounding the pupil, and these smooth muscles control the diameter of a pupil in accordance to the light intensity. These smooth muscles operated by the involuntary division of the nervous system. Therefore, if these smooth muscles do not respond to the light stimulation, the patient's nervous system does not working well, therefore it could be a sign of brain death. So involuntary control of nervous system implies the maintenance of vitality regardless of your realization or not. Cardiac muscle is found only in the heart, and its contraction provides a major force for moving blood through the circulatory system. It is striated muscle, although striations are not as many as skeletal muscle, but striations are present. And you can see clear line. We call this intercalated disc. This intercalated disc tightly bound together and connect by gap junction so that electrical impulse conduct from cell to cell almost simultaneously. Some cell has only one nucleus. Some cardiac muscle cells have two nuclei. Unlike skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle and many smooth muscles are autorhythmic, which means they contract spontaneously at somewhat regular interval. And nervous stimulation is not necessarily always required for them to contract. Furthermore, smooth muscle and cardiac muscle are not consciously controlled by the nervous system. So if you command to your heart or stomach saying, okay, just stop moving for 10 milliseconds, your stomach or heart will not follow your order. Rather, they are controlled involuntarily or unconsciously by the autonomic nervous system. Skeletal muscle tissue attached to and move the skeleton. Skeletal muscle tissue make up 40% of body weight. You can see this is a single skeletal muscle cell, and the length is approximately from 1 millimeter up to 4 centimeter, and diameter is 10 micrometer up to 100 micrometer. It has a striation, a dark and light strip transversely across its muscle cell. Cells elongated and cylindrical shape. And then you can see several nuclei present in the muscle cell. So we call this multinucleate cell. Skeletal muscle tissue is innervated by the voluntary division of a nervous system. So you can consciously control skeletal muscle tissue. If I say to you now, raise your hand, I mean, you might not raise your hand because we cannot see each other, but some students might raise your hand at the time since you listen from me. From auditory nerve signal transmit to motor neuron. Then motor neuron send nerve signal to your muscle cell membrane. Then muscle tissue coordinate together and raise your hand. So nervous system voluntarily, consciously control the function of skeletal muscles. Let's look at muscle attachment. A muscle attachment is the location on a bone where a muscle connects to the bone. Each skeletal muscle extends from one bone to another. Look at here, humerus and ulna. And here's a joint. When a muscle contracts, it comes one of a bone to move while the other bone usually remain fixed. So when you flex forearm, the muscle attached on the humerus is fixed, but the muscle attached on ulnar bone is going to move. Origin means the attachment of a muscle on the less movable bone is called origin of a muscle. So this is the origin of a muscle in case of a flexing forearm. Insertion is muscle attachment on the more movable bone. We call that muscle insertion. So when the muscle contracts, its insertion is pulled toward its origin. It's like muscle on ulnar bone pull toward its origin, muscle on the humerus. For example, you learn sternocleidomastoid. Sometimes muscle name is made based on origin and insertion. For example, sternocleidomastoid. The origin is sternum, and this muscle inserts toward mastoid bone. Mastoid bone is the inferior portion of a temporal bone. So here's sternum, and the muscle originates from the sternum and then insert toward mastoid bone. Therefore, the name of this muscle is sternocleidomastoid. Cleido means it originates from sternum, but in the middle of that, the other muscle originated from clavicle, joined together, then insert toward mastoid bone. So, the name of this muscle is sternocleidomastoid based on origin and insertion. The origin and insertion is not always fixed. It can be changeable. When you flex forearm, the origin of the muscle is humerus and insertion is the ulna because the muscle on the ulna is moved and distally attached. However, when you are hanging from a bar doing chin-ups, this time humerus move whereas the ulna is fixed. So the function of origin and insertion may switch depending on body position and movement. Muscle attached to their origin and insertion via strong fibrous periosteum of the bone. Periosteum is most outer layer of compact bone, which is connective tissue. Muscle attached to the bone by way of connective tissue. Some muscles attached to the bone look like directly, almost directly. Some muscles attach to the bone indirectly. In case of direct attachment, the attaching strand of the connective tissue is so thin and short, so it looks like a muscle fascicle, that means a bundle of muscle fiber, themselves appear to attach it directly to the bone. So actually there is connective tissue between muscle and bone, but this connective tissue is very short and very thin. Therefore, it looks like muscle directly attached to the bone. We call that direct or flash attachment. Indirect attachment is connective tissue extend beyond the end of muscle fiber to form either cord-like tendon or a flat sheet called aponeurosis. So tendon is connective tissue. Tendon connect muscle to the bone. And like this is tendon. It's cord-like. Therefore, this tendon connect muscle to the bone. We call this indirect attachment. So tendon is the example of indirect attachment. Another connective tissue named aponeurosis. Aponeurosis is dense fibrous connective tissue containing fibroblast and collagen fiber. It is a tendon-like material, but it has a very flat shape. And this flat shape connective tissue anchor a muscle to the bone. This figure shows the aponeurosis from the frontal bone and covers the parietal bone. Usually, indirect attachment like this one, aponeurosis or cord-like tendon, these kinds of indirect attachment are more common than a direct attachment, and most muscles have tendons. Also, when you study skeletal system, you study greater trochanter on the head region of femur and lesser trochanter, or when you study humerus, you study greater tubercle or lesser tubercle. It's kind of a protrusion on the bone. That is the region where the muscle attached to the bone. So raised bone marking are often present where tendons meet bones. So for example, greater, lesser trochanter, like this. Here's a femur bone, here's a head, acetabulum, and here's the head of a femur, and here's greater trochanter, or the other side, a lesser trochanter in femur, other side where muscle attached to the bone. Muscle cell is called muscle fiber. Why we put fiber? Because in embryonic stage, embryonic mesoderm cells undergo cell division and it becomes large and it forms a myoblast. Several myoblasts fuse together to form a myotube. This myotube, this becomes a precursor of a muscle cell. Myotube mature into skeletal muscle fiber. Since several muscles fuse together to form fiber shape, therefore we call muscle cell as muscle fiber. So muscle fiber means muscle cell, same meaning. A single fiber can extend from one end of a muscle to the other, and each muscle cell contains several nuclei located around the periphery of the fiber near the plasma membrane. You can see here nucleus. Here's nucleus, and several cells fuse together to form fiber shape. We call muscle fiber same of a muscle cell. Let's look at gross anatomy of a skeletal muscle. Muscle fiber, same of a muscle cell. Here's muscle fiber, muscle cell. Each skeletal muscle cell is a single long cylindrical cell. Each muscle fiber is surrounded by a loose connective tissue or reticular fiber. We call this connective tissue endomysium. Endomysium. Here's muscle fiber, but outside muscle fiber is surrounded by loose connective tissue named endomysium. You can see here's another muscle fiber, another muscle cell, each muscle cell surrounded by endomysium. And each muscle fiber bundle them together. This bundle of several muscle fiber is called muscle fascicle. Muscle fascicle. Muscle fascicle is just these several muscle fiber put together. We call them muscle fascicle. This muscle fascicle surrounded by fibrous connective tissue, we call that paramysium. Paramysium. So these indicate fascicle. So fascicle is more like this one. And the outer layer of this fascicle surrounded by paramysium. So can you see this outline? This is paramysium. Paramysium. So there are several muscle fascicles, and each muscle fascicles are surrounded by paramysium, and the entire muscle surrounded by outer layer of a skeletal muscle is kind of sheath. That outer layer of skeletal muscle is a dense irregular connective tissue named epimysium. Epimysium wrap entire muscle. So one more time, this is muscle fiber, muscle cell, and outside the muscle cell, there's endomysium. So let's look at here. Here, this is muscle fiber, just outside the muscle fiber, this is endomysium. Here's endomysium. and you have several muscle fiber, bundle them together. We call this muscle fascicle. Muscle fascicle. This muscle fascicle here, you can see muscle fascicle. Several muscle cells bundle them together. This muscle fascicle is surrounded by connective tissue named this one. Can you see here? Here's paramycium. Connective tissue outside muscle fascicle is called paramycium. And there are several muscle fascicles, and the entire muscle is surrounded by epimycium. So these three kinds of connective tissue bind muscle fibers, hold them in parallel alignment, and these connective tissue work together and produce force. All three kinds of connective tissue cover to form the tendon. In other words, these connective tissue eventually connect to the tendon and other kinds of connective tissue. This kind of architect is important because the paramycium surrounding bundle of muscle fibers is an extension of the epimycium into the muscle, and it connects with the endomycium. So three layers of connective tissue, endo, para, epimycium covering the muscle, blend together with the tendon. Therefore, contraction of a muscle fiber results in the movement of a structure such as bone and skin. In other words, single muscle fiber move, but this connective tissue blend them together. Therefore, even though single muscle fiber move, that movement can generate the movement of a bone. This sequence transmits the force of contraction to the bone followed by being moved. So single muscle fiber contract, but this contraction can blend with three kinds of connective tissue, even including tendon. Therefore, this transmission of a force of contraction eventually make bone move. Nerve and blood vessels also innervate on muscle tissue. Each skeletal muscle is supplied by nerve and blood vessel. And the nerve and blood vessel branch repeatedly in the intramuscular connective tissue, with the smallest branches serving individual muscle fiber. So here is nerve ending. Once the nerve ending branches, and it forms very tiny space between nerve ending and muscle fiber. We call that neuromuscular junction. And this is the way how nervous system communicate to muscle tissue. Also, a blood vessel innervate in muscle tissue. So capillaries form a network within endomycium. The rich blood supply to muscles reflect the high demand that contracting muscle fibers have for nutrient and oxygen. So if you look at this microscopic figure, you can see this orange color. Here is muscle fiber running horizontally and stained orange color. This orange color indicates muscle fiber. This wavy line, wavy appearance shows the tiny capillary blood vessel. So extensive vascular network delivers necessary oxygen and nutrient and carries away waste produced by muscle fibers. So the muscle has a rich supply of nerve and blood vessel. Let's move to microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle tissue. As I mentioned that this text stress skeletal muscle tissue more than other muscle tissue, so we will look at microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle fibers are long cylindrical cells, and they are very huge cells. So the diameter is up to 100 micrometer. The length is 30 centimeter in long muscle. Each muscle fiber is formed by the fusion of hundreds of embryonic cells. I mentioned this. Because of that, the fiber developed this way. They contain many nuclei that lie in the periphery of each fiber, just deep to the sarcolemma. So this is muscle fiber. This is one muscle cell. Inside the muscle cell, you can see some stick-like structure. This is called myofibril. Myofibril is organelle. Do you remember in the cell there's a nucleus and then some other membrane-bound organelle, subcellular organelle, endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria. It's like organelle. Myofibril is organelle. And myofibril in muscle cell look like a stick-like structure. There are several myofibrils in single muscle cell. This is muscle fiber, single muscle cell. Inside the muscle cell, there are several myofibril organelles. And the membrane of muscle cell is named sarcolemma. And each muscle cell surrounded by endomysium. Several muscle fibers bundled together, we call this muscle fascicle. This muscle fascicle, can you see here? Muscle fascicle surrounded by paramysium. Here's outside muscle fascicle. And then there are several muscle fascicle. Entire muscle is surrounded by epimysium. And this epimysium connect to tendon, connect to bone by way of tendon. From now on, I will use a little bit different terminology which can be used only in the muscle tissue. Muscle fiber, same of a muscle cell, and plasma membrane. Ordinary cell has plasma membrane. The plasma membrane in muscle cell is called sarcolemma. Sarco means muscle. So sarcolemma means plasma membrane of muscle cell. Many nuclei lie inside the sarcolemma because the sarcolemma is plasma membrane of a muscle cell. So inside the sarcolemma, there are several nuclei located. Myofibril, I mentioned that like this, like a stick-like structure. This is organelle. This myofibril is organelle. A thread-like structure or stick-like structure that extends from one end of the muscle fiber to the other end of a muscle fiber. The components of myofibrils are actin myofilament, myosin myofilament. Actin myofilament is called thin myofilament or thin filament. A myosin myofilament is called thick myofilament or thick filament. These two kinds of myofilament generate striation. So striation results from myofibril. Myofibril is composed of actin and myosin. So these two proteins major player to produce striation. So myofibril is organelle in muscle fiber, and myofibril is composed of actin and myosin myofilament. Sarcomere means actin and myosin myofilament form highly ordered unit. So sarcomere is a structural unit of a muscle contraction. So sarcomere, we will study this a little bit later. And then there's a Z disc and then another Z line, and we call this sarcomere. You will see detailed structure a little bit later. But sarcomere is the structural unit of a muscle contraction. Sarcoplasm is cytoplasm of muscle fiber. So muscle cell, inside the cell, there's an organelle named myofibril. The rest in the muscle fiber, except organelle, is called sarcoplasm. In other words, cytoplasm without myofibril. So except this organelle, the rest part of cytoplasm in muscle fiber is called sarcoplasm. Sarcoplasmic reticulum is smooth endoplasmic reticulum in muscle fiber. So do you remember in ordinary cell, there's a nucleus. Nucleus has two layers of membrane, and outer membrane is extend and curve and to form endoplasmic reticulum. So sarcoplasmic reticulum is smooth endoplasmic reticulum in the muscle fiber. We call that sarcoplasmic reticulum. So here, this is myofilament. Therefore, we call this myofibril. This filament, one is actin, the other one is myosin filament. These two kinds of myofilament form myofibril. You can see this thread-like or stick-like myofibril in the muscle fiber. And then you can see this membrane is sarcolemma. Plasma membrane of muscle fiber is sarcolemma. Therefore, this is muscle fiber. This is muscle fiber. Inside the muscle fiber, sarcolemma, the plasma membrane of muscle fiber. Inside sarcolemma, you can see thread-like or stick-like myofibril. These myofibrils is organelle, and myofibril is composed of two kinds of myofilament. And also, there's a blood vessel innervate in muscle fiber, and sometimes motor neuron, axon of a motor neuron also intervene to muscle fiber. I mentioned sarcomere is basic structural unit of a contraction. What is the composition of a sarcomere? Sarcomere is a repeating segment throughout myofibril. So myofibril is like a thread-like or stick-like organelle. And when you look at myofibril, you can see this kind of dark light striation. This striation can be generated by myofilament. And then the distribution of a myofilament to generate a certain repeating pattern. This repeating segment is called sarcomere. So can you see Z disc or Z line? And here's another Z disc. And there will be another Z line over here and back here. But between these two Z line, we call this a sarcomere. So sarcomere has a Z line, the boundary at the two ends of each sarcomere. Sarcomere extend from one Z disc to the next Z disc. Actin and myosin filament form highly ordered unit. So here's Z disc and actin filament attached to Z disc. Here's a Z disc. Can you see blue line? This is actin myofilament or thin filament. Can you see red, a little bit thick bar structure? This is myosin myofilament or thick filament. So sarcomere has thin filament and thick filament. Thin filament, same of actin filament. Many thin filaments are attached to each Z disc. Actin filament extend toward the center of the sarcomere, and in case of a thick filament, it's called myosin myofilament or myosin filament. Primarily consists of a myosin molecule. Myosin molecule contain ATPase enzyme that split ATP to ADP plus phosphate. At the time, release energy. This energy used for muscle contraction. So this is muscle fiber, and you can see this membrane. This is a sarcolemma, and inside the muscle fiber you can see thread-like or stick-like myofibril. These are the organelle. This myofibril is composed of actin and myosin myofilament. And then between myofibril, you can see mitochondria. Mitochondria, what is the main function of a mitochondria? Generating ATP. This myosin, thick myofilament need ATP. So mitochondria provide ATP closely located nearby myofibril. And this is nucleus. Nucleus is kind of pushed away to sarcolemma because the center portion of a muscle fiber is fully occupied with myofibril. Sarcomere, let's look at one more time. Here's Z disc. Here's Z disc. One end of G disc, another end of G disc, and then this is thin filament. Another word, actin myofilament. Actin myofilament always attached to Z line. Thin filament always attached to Z disc. And this red color, this indicate thick filament. Myosin myofilament. Myosin myofilament does not attach to Z disc. And here's some portion overlap between thin filament and thick filament. So there's some interaction occur between thin and thick filament. Let's look at actin myofilament a little bit detailed. So this thin filament has a molecular structure like this. So actin molecule, this purple spherical shape indicate actin molecule. And there's a blue string indicate tropomyosin. And the red color indicate troponin. And when you look at actin molecule, there is some bright spot. This is active site of actin protein. Some portion of actin protein is active site. This site is for the contact of myosin head for the occurrence of contraction. So actin filament look like just thin line, but molecular structure has actin protein, which has active site, and outside actin protein, there's tropomyosin protein wrapped around the actin protein, and another protein named troponin also attached to actin protein. So this is single actin protein kinds of polymerized together, and they form two lines twist. And outside this actin molecule assembled, there are tropomyosin and troponin protein also associated together. Let's look at striation more detail. Striation, the sarcomere structure explains the patterns of striation in skeletal muscle fibers. The dark bands are created by the full length of thick filament in sarcomere along with the inner end of thin filament. Therefore, if we look at this diagram, here's green line indicate Z disc, Z line, and this red thin line indicate thin filament, and blue bar structure indicate thick filament. Scientists put the name of a band or a zone depending on the behavior of thin filament and thick filament. So if we look at this blue thick filament, we call this region A band, and only thin filament region we call that I band. If we look at thin filament from here up to here. So some portion of thin filament overlap with thick filament, but do not include this thick filament. Only thin filament region is called I band. Only thick filament region called A band. So dark bands are created by the full length of a thick filament. We call this region A band. Let me go down to I band first. The two regions of either side of the A band, which contain only thin filament, are called I band. So two regions of either side of A band. Here's either side of A band. So from here to here, only thin filament region, we call that I band. Only here to here, we call that I band. This portion of I band overlap with the thick filament, but do not include that portion of I band. Only thin filament region, we call that I band. Only thick filament region, we call that A band. When you look at A band, the central part of A band, there is no thin filament region. So A band also overlap with thin filament here and here, but do not include that region, and then only thick filament, this and this region. We call that H zone. So H zone is a part of A band, but H zone does not have any thin filament. So central part of A band where no thin filament, no actin myofilament reach is the H zone. And if we look at H zone, here's at the center of H zone contain tiny rod that hold thick filament together. These thick filament together, there's some tiny rod line. We call that M. So you must know the structure of sarcomere detail. Therefore, when muscle contract, how these bands change pattern, you need to know about that. I just introduced the structure of sarcomere. So you must clearly know that where is A band, where is I band, where is H zone, where is M line, and where is sarcomere. Let's review one more time. Here's Z line. Here's the other end of Z line. Between two Z line, we call sarcomere. And here's Z line. What kind of filament attach Z line? Always actin myofilament. Actin filament, thin filament attached to Z line. Here's G line and actin filament attached to Z line. And here's thick filament, myosin myofilament. Let's look at here. This is myosin molecule. Molecular structure have head and rod. So this head region eventually later is bind to active site of actin myofilament. Actin myofilament, we saw the molecular structure just before, and here's actin protein polymerized to form twisted double linear structure, and outside polymerized actin protein, there's tropomyosin, a string structure of tropomyosin wrapped around actin filament, and also troponin associated with actin filament. Sarcoplasmic reticulum and T-tubule. Sarcoplasmic reticulum, smooth endoplasmic reticulum in muscle fiber is called sarcoplasmic reticulum. So smooth endoplasmic reticulum in muscle fiber. Each skeletal muscle fiber contains two sets of tubules that participate in the regulation of a muscle contraction. So sarcoplasmic reticulum, this yellow color indicates sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's like a sleeve, loosely woven sweater. If you imagine this myofibril as your arm, and then you wear sweater outside arm, but the sweater woven loosely, the yellow color look like sleeve, loosely woven sweater, and this is sarcoplasmic reticulum. And if you look at sarcoplasmic reticulum, this also sarcoplasmic reticulum, and there is some invagination along myofibril. Deep invagination of the sarcolemma, that runs between each pair of terminal cisternae. We call this T-tubule. Sarcolemma is membrane of muscle fiber. This membrane is invaginate inner portion of myofibril. We call this T-tubule. Based on T-tubule, adjacent to each side of T-tubule is kind of extended sarcoplasmic reticulum. We call this portion terminal cisternae. So, please be familiar with new terminology such as T-tubule and terminal cisternae. Let's look at here. This is sarcolemma, plasma membrane of muscle cell. This sarcolemma invaginate interior portion of myofibril, and then it come out. So it look like a T structure. So we call this T-tubule. T-tubule. And this blue color indicate sarcoplasmic reticulum. So near the T-tubule, sarcoplasmic reticulum is enlarged to form terminal cisternae. We call this structure terminal cisternae. Here's a terminal cisternae here. Here's another terminal cisternae here. So T-tubule wrap around sarcomere of myofibril in the region where actin and myosin myofilaments overlap. If you look behind the sarcoplasmic reticulum, this purple bar structure is thick filament. And when you look at this red line, this is thin filament. Therefore, T-tubule wrap around the sarcomere of myofibril in the region where actin and myosin myofilament overlap. And also, T-tubule plus two adjacent terminal cisternae, we call that triad. Triad means three. So, two terminal cisternae, therefore three. So, here's a T-tubule and these two adjacent terminal cisternae, we call that triad. So, terminal cisternae is part of sarcoplasmic reticulum. But this sarcoplasmic reticulum is a little bit enlarged sac, SAC. It has shape like an enlarged sac of sarcoplasmic reticulum. We call that terminal cisternae. Why this kind of a structure required? Let's think about that. One more time. Sarcoplasmic reticulum and T-tubule. Sarcoplasmic reticulum is like a sleeve of a loosely woven sweater surrounds your arm. So look like this time. In this figure, blue color indicates sarcoplasmic reticulum, a loosely woven sweater. And sarcoplasmic reticulum, an elaborate smooth endoplasmic reticulum whose inner connecting tubules surrounded each myofibril and run longitudinally along the myofibril. This is myofibril entire, this thread-like, stick-like, is myofibril, myofibril, myofibril. And myofibril has this thick filament and blue line, thin filament. Thick filament is the same of myosin myofilament. Thin blue line is actin myofilament. And outside myofibril, there's sarcoplasmic reticulum. And here's sarcolemma. This sarcolemma invaginate interior of myofibril to form T-tubule. This T-tubule, a little bit less blue color, is located adjacent to terminal cisternae. Terminal cisternae is a part of sarcoplasmic reticulum, but this sarcoplasmic reticulum is enlarged around the T-tubule we call that structure terminal cistern. Therefore, here's terminal cistern and here's T-tubule, and all these together we call triad. T-tubule, T means transverse tubule. Why T-tubule or triad is important? The action potential or nerve impulse or nerve signal in the sarcolemma cause the contraction of a muscle fiber. These nerve signals are further conducted by the T-tubule. T-tubule looks like a tube and it has a deep invagination of a sarcolemma. Therefore, T-tubule run between each pair of terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Because T-tubules are continuation of the sarcolemma, T-tubule conduct each nerve impulse to the deepest region of the muscle fiber. So, can you see this arrow sign? This is the sign of action potential coming from nervous system. This nerve impulse transmit through sarcolemma and then sarcolemma invaginate interior portion of myofibril. At the time, nerve impulse also transmit through membrane of T-tubule. This nerve signal conduct deep into myofibril in order to induce muscle contraction. What is the detailed mechanism of muscle contraction? The sarcoplasmic reticulum store a large quantity of calcium ion, which are released when the muscle is stimulated to contract. Calcium ion diffuse through the cytosol to the thin filament, where they trigger the sliding filament mechanism of contraction. After the contraction, calcium ions are pumped back into sarcoplasmic reticulum for storage. Aha! There is some reason why the structure of a triad is required. Why T-tubules need to invaginate. Why some enlarged structure of sarcoplasmic reticulum present adjacent to T-tubule. Once nerve impulse transmit through sarcolemma, this nerve signal run through T-tubule because T-tubule is still sarcolemma, which is invaginated interior portion of myofibril. Then, once this nerve impulse conducted, then here's terminal cisternae. Inside the terminal cisternae, there's calcium ions stored. Once nerve impulse arrive in T-tubule, then calcium ions stored in terminal cisternae diffuse out into sarcoplasm. Sarcoplasm is cytoplasm in muscle fiber. Now, calcium ion came out of terminal cisternae into sarcoplasm. This calcium ion is going to bind to thin filament, actin myofilament. Then this trigger muscle contraction. Let's solve the question. Question 1. What is the major microfilament found in the skeletal muscle tissue? Actin myofilament, myosin myofilament, or both, or none of them? You can find the answer. Second question. Which muscle tissue consists of the digestive tract? Skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or all of them? You can find the answer from the lecture. This is example of submit to assignment. You need to send quiz answers to my email address. You need to include your email address and subject title SCI 101. Week 6 assignment. This is email main text body. You need to write your last name, comma, followed by first name. Please do not swap the position between last name and first name. You must start with last name, comma, then first name. It must be your official name, not nickname. So first line in main text body is your official name. The next line, question 1, answer will be 1 out of A, B, C, D. Question 2, answer 1 out of A, B, C, D. And you have to submit this email to me until next Wednesday midnight. This is the end of lecture video. Thank you.